Good afternoon, my name is Katia Garcia, and today I'm going to be talking about the text US Trade Wars with Emerging Countries in the 21st Century Make America and its Partners Lose Again. This text looks at the potential impact of trade wars initiated by a change in the US trade policies. We show that such trade wars can hurt emerging countries and damage the global trading system without bringing gains for the United States. The end of 2016 and the beginning of 2017 saw a dramatic change in the global trade picture. After the British referendum supporting the exit of the United Kingdom from the European Union, the US presidential election followed with the victory of Donald Trump, who made many protectionist statements during the campaign, particularly treating China, Mexico, and Germany with the import duties. He announced that he will impose tariffs of 35% on Mexican imports and 45% on Chinese imports to protect American jobs from unfair foreign competition. For the United States, initiating a trade war is not the right policy for improving domestic welfare and gross domestic product. Trade wars could be significantly damaging for these trading partners, particularly Mexico, which is smaller than the United States in economic terms, and whose exports are concentrated toward the United States. Johnson analyzed the case of trade wars based on the optimum tariff argument and was the first to clearly demonstrate that large countries can benefit from a trade war whereas small countries always lose. He demonstrated this point under a neoclassical framework with perfect competition, well-behaved utility functions, and ad valorem tariffs. In the general case, large countries lose from trade wars. Grossman and Helpman, 1995. They introduced domestic political agendas into the analysis of international relations with terms of trade externalities, under the assumption that national leaders are concerned not only with maximizing welfare, but also with collecting campaign contributions from special interest groups. These authors studied the formation of the tariff equilibrium and the possibility of a cooperative policy equilibrium. Through trade restrictions, countries modify the terms of a trade at the expense of their trading partners. However, this is not the only way in which trade relations and trade wars can be studied. Strategic trade is also a channel through which the characteristics of trade policy equilibria can be examined. It is interesting to note that the United States is not particularly mistreated in terms of access to China. Japan, the Caribbean community, and Western Europe are more penalized by China due to their specialization structure. US access to Mexico is free, thanks to the NAFTA, whereas countries like China, the Republic of Korea, and those of the South Asia region are clearly disadvantaged in terms of access to Mexico. It is also worth noting that the average tariff the United States faces when it exports to China is 5%. When China exports to the United States, it faces an average import duty of 3%. There is no bilateral reciprocity, but trade relations have never been based on this principle since World War II. Myra Growup is a recursive, dynamic, multi-region, multi-sector model. In here, the government is explicitly modeled as different from private agents. Government income consists of taxes collected on production, on factors of productions, on exports, on imports, on consumption, and on households' income. Myra Growup has already been utilized to study issues related to international trade and trade policy. In Myra Growup, the real exchange rate is adjusted in such a way that the current account balance is as stable as a percentage of global GDP. The government or public account closure assumption concerns on how the public balance is affected when taxes are changed by a reform. Now we're going to talk about the relations between US and Mexico. The Mexican government has to impose a substantially increased tariff on US goods, especially because the United States is the source of only 47% of all Mexican imports. Because the Mexican economy relies on US inputs, reducing US imports has a direct negative impact on US exports to Mexico. This points to important policy conclusions. The first one, as exemplified by the history of trade relations, small countries don't have the capacity to retaliate against large countries. Protectionism is ordered to avoid losses to their own citizens and inflict losses on their large trading partners. The second one is the design of trade relation must be conducted rationally, with the objective of maximizing domestic welfare. The implementation of retaliation based on other principles may be particularly self-demanding. Now we're going to talk about value add and real wages. A clear motivation of this US protectionist law is to promote domestic production and employment, with a potential negative effect on sectoral value added in Mexico. Now we're going to talk about the relations between US and China. The US imposition of a 35 percentage point increase in import duties on Chinese products represent a severe loss of terms of trade for China, which has to impose a relatively high augmentation of import duties on US products to re-establish its initial terms of trade. Chinese reprisals are even more severe in the country's objective is to collect the same amount of duties the United States has collected. Due to the trade flow from the United States to China, which is much smaller than the trade flow from China to the United States tariff. They are implemented to maximize welfare at much smaller, showing that US governments does not maximize its domestic welfare by imposing a 35 percentage point of import duties on Chinese products. Trade impacts. In relation to the impact on total exports by both countries, a US-China trade war implies trade structure share relative equality between the United States and China. Due to the size of the two economies involved and their involvement in the regional trade on both sides of the Pacific, side effects on third parties are much larger in the US-Mexico scenarios. And in my conclusion, we can see how the United States has, we see through the history, always tries to take advantage of the countries with which has agreements or treaties, not only economically but in many other issues, which is why we must be informed about all these events, not only with our country, but all over the world, to see how the global economy is affected by the world powers. US in this case, and we have to prevent or find a way that doesn't affect our economy. Thank you for watching, and I hope that this video was useful for you.